Hello and welcome to Border Report Live. I'm your host for this Tuesday edition, Rudy Mireles, coming to you from the Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining me for today's edition in South Texas is South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez. Hey, Sandra.
Hi, Rudy.
Hey, good to have you. Lots to talk about today, but let's start with some of the things making headlines and happening right now, starting with the Supreme Court of the United States has allowed immigrants deported to be deported to third world countries. Also happening today, the Trump administration says ICE agents now face a 500% increase in assaults while trying to arrest migrants, and he's vowing to prosecute those who are doxing ICE agents. And for those of you wondering what doxing means, it's basically revealing their identities and spreading that information online. In other news, a record as far as detentions go, as of June 15th of this year, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is reporting having detained 56,397 people. That is a record number since May of 2019, according to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. And today, happening now, Homeland Security Kristi Noem was in Panama meeting with leaders there, swinging through as she swings through Central America, including Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala, and actually watched a deportation flight arrive in Panama. Now, for some news that's happening on the other side of the world, but possibly affecting us here, U.S. has attacked uranium facilities in Iran. Now, Iran attacked a U.S. base in Qatar in retaliation to that. Now, President Trump, says there has been a ceasefire, but escalating tensions in the Middle East, thousands of miles away, that has an impact here on the southwest border as well. So let's go ahead and bring in Sandra once again. Sandra, how is border security affected when something like this is happening on the other side of the world?
Well, I think very much so, Rudy. I think we have to be aware that we here on the southern border, potentially it is a threat point. Kristi Noem on Sundays, Homeland Security issued what's called a National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin. What she was saying, this 3-month warning says there's a heightened threat environment in the United States. She's warning that violent extremists could mobilize within the country. The agency's warning of terrorist attacks that could happen, including against anti-Semitic attacks and cybersecurity hacks, as well as people who are in the United States. And a little later, we're going to talk about the number of people who are coming from other countries and reports of people being here from some of these Middle Eastern countries. She's saying that, these people could be plotting additional attacks on U.S. soil. Now, here on the border, U.S. Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection officers are continuing to do additional screening for people coming into U.S. ports or those who are crossing in between, who are crossing illegally for what are considered terrorist bloc countries. Now, what I've learned doing some reporting this week, these people are called special interest aliens, and they're subjected to additional screening when they cross at a port of entry with a CBP officer or encountered by a Border Patrol agent on the ground. They must explain, let's say they're at a port. They have to talk about the reason that they're traveling, why they're coming, where they'll stay. They're subject to a litany of questions that other people normally would not go through. They're fingerprinted, their photos are taken, biometric information is stored, and their information can be logged into a terrorist screening database. What we're seeing here are some file photos that CBP sent us as we saw large numbers of people come across the South Texas border last May, right before Title 42 was lifted, and they began this biometric screening of people. Now we know that they're doing this and keeping all this information for those with any suspect of affiliation to terrorist organizations or gangs. So, heightened sense of awareness here on the border, thousands of miles away from where the action's happening.
Now, just to clarify really quick, just a question. These special interest aliens, are these, again, individuals that are from a certain country or just individuals that have been known to have ties in the past, rather?
Well, there's two different groups, but anyone who comes from a country that has known terrorist affiliations, Iran, Syria, yes, they will be subject to these potential additional screenings before being admitted into the country, or maybe not even admitted at all.
Now, speaking of Iran, are we seeing any kind of activity from folks from that country as they're crossing the border? We often talk about, all the countries that, in Central and South America, but is there anyone coming from that side of the world?
During the Biden administration, they broke down the number of people who crossed, who were encountered on the border, by individual countries. What we are seeing now is called an other category, and the other category has grown by 13% this fiscal year. That started in October. So the regular countries are Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. Those numbers are going down, but the numbers of people coming from other countries, China, Uzbekistan, they're going up. And what CBS actually just reported over the weekend, ICE arrested 11 Iranian nationals who were illegally in the United States. They're saying DHS has identified and arrested. They are known or suspected terrorists and violent extremists, and that they illegally entered the country, they're saying, during the Biden administration. What we do know is on this terrorism screening, we have had just about 600 people screened for suspected terrorism since the start of fiscal year 2025. And like I said, that is an increase.
Now, what about the asylum seekers from those countries with known terrorist connections? Are they the ones that are clearing and through that process? Are they being just released into the country?
So no one is getting asylum. Actually, CBP just released their May encounter numbers, and they proudly said that absolutely 0 people were released on humanitarian parole across the southwest border. So anyone who did not have proper documentations, did not enter at a legal port of entry, did not come across. That includes anyone from any country, okay? What we are learning is that most of the people from, say, Iran, some of these countries with the terrorist blocks, usually fly in to major airports, Houston, New York, LaGuardia. So they are more subject to CBP screening at those facilities. We are under the Trump administration policy, migrants are not allowed to come to the border and claim asylum. And so we are not seeing people crossing the border from any country at this time. And if they do, they're being sent right back.
As far as numbers, we were kind of talking about it last week. The encounters for these folks in between the ports of entry are down across the entire southwest border. So is there a threat?
Well, what they were saying, 0 people crossed, 62,000 people crossed in May of 2024. So that's a huge difference, right? And in May of 2025, the Border Patrol encountered 8,725 people who tried to get across. 0 were allowed across. I guess what law enforcement will tell you, if people try to come and they don't have proper documentation, they're not vetted, they, in essence, are a threat to society.
All right. Well, we're going to continue this conversation and lots more after the break. So stay with us. You're watching Border Report Live. Hello and welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Meireles and I'm your host, and I'm joined today by South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez. And before the break, Sandra, one of the things that we were talking about was what's going on at the border, the drop in encounters. One of the things we were talking about before the break is, are they increasing resources, and that's human resources and other equipment along the border?
Yeah. So far, what I've learned, local sector here, Rio Grande Valley sector is waiting for top-down information from DHS headquarters in DC, but whether they need to increase manpower over time. But what everyone is encouraging is this See Something, Say Something campaign, which was launched last year, a nationwide campaign. And they're saying, if you see any kind of criminal or suspicious activity, something different, report it to your local law enforcement. They're collaborating with FBI, with DHS, and they're going to put all these tips together. And they say that everything is important at this time.
You know, that's a very good way to segue into this next little piece of news. It's something that definitely affects folks in the Rio Grande Valley down here in South Texas, and it's a similar warning to the one we actually got last year, but the U.S. Consulate and the Secretary of Security in Reynosa have actually issued a travel alert for the Monterrey-Reynosa Highway in Mexico. Now, the State Department's travel advisory for Tamaulipas has actually declared the state of Tamaulipas as a level 4, which means do not travel due to crime and kidnapping. And according to a release by the U.S. Consulate, they've been made aware of disappearances on the highway between Monterrey and Reynosa. And again, this is something we kind of saw last year. It was involving those charter bus lines that so many of our friends, family, people, neighbors we know here in the valley take to go visit other family members deeper into Mexico from Reynosa or Matamoros or wherever it may be. But the Security Secretary for Reynosa has also issued a warning to avoid the Monterrey-Reynosa Highway at night, and the U.S. government's actually telling employees they cannot travel between cities in Tamaulipas using the interior Mexican highways.
So disconcerting because so many of us have family down there and so many of us like to go and travel there. But like you said, right now it's a do not travel zone.
How does that impact us, here on this side of the border?
Well, it shows the danger that exists, right? And it also kind of emphasizes how Texas has been stepping up its border efforts. This past week, I've actually been reporting on Texas's efforts to build border wall, which is, definitely shows how they're trying to keep people out who don't belong in. Texas has got an update this week, built 66 miles of its own state-funded border wall since it started Operation Lone Star in 2021. Now, the Texas Facilities Commission is this agency that oversees contract negotiations, land easements, and they're the ones that approve all the contracts. Here's some video I shot not too long ago of wall here in the Rio Grande Valley. And Texas says that the legislature has wrapped, and they actually did not appropriate specific funding for Texas border wall, and they're going to put a pause on building more border wall once they get to 83 miles. So like I said, they're at 66. They think they'll have 83 miles built out by next summer. And actually this, what's interesting about this video here is there was a fire and the border wall actually stopped the fire a couple of months ago.
Oh, wow.
But you can see the gaps in the border wall. Looks like teeth missing from a pumpkin. And they are efforting to fill in those gaps. This is kind of a mixture of federal and state wall that we're seeing here. And really interesting is that there is no way to differentiate the federal wall from the state wall. Looks identical.
So are they using the same companies, the same contractors, same everything?
Well, they're using the same material and the same plan. It is the bollards they actually purchased from surplus from San Diego, from California during the Biden administration. It's the same plan, 5-foot anti-slip, anti-climb plate put over the top. It's 5-inch bollards with 4 inches in between, and 6 feet of concrete underneath. It's the same. It's really hard to tell the difference between them. But Texas is saying that, once we get to these 83 miles, we are not going to build any more contracts. If we're currently negotiating with you, if you're a landowner, we may put a pause on that. We're really waiting to see what's happening. And here's the underlying thought there. Texas hopes the federal government is going to reimburse them for some of this money that they spent since 2021. If you remember, they've spent over $11 billion on border security. Some of that is included in the border wall building. And there was a provision in the president's budget bill right now that if it was to pass today, would allow $13 billion to go back to states, it says, like Texas, so not just Texas, for reimbursement. But the Senate parliamentarian just recently ruled that there cannot be funds for state border security in that bill. So that actually kind of throws a wrench in it. But Mike Novak, the executive director of the Texas Facility Commissions, just very recently addressed the commissioners and said, we're going to wait and see what happens with policy, with the federal government. They're really hoping that the federal government's going to step up. When I asked Governor Abbott's office, his spokesman said, it's interesting. Let me read to you a little bit about what the statement he said. Thanks to President Trump's bold leadership, the federal government is finally fulfilling its obligation to secure the southern border and deport criminal illegal immigrants. Because of these renewed federal assets in Texas, our state can now adjust aspects of state-funded border security efforts. Specialized units within the Texas Department of Public Safety and Texas Military Department will carry on their missions both at the border and throughout Texas. So, very much signaling that there could also be a change in all these positioning of National Guard troops here on the border, building of massive border wall. They're really hoping the federal government will take some of this off of their slate.
Speaking of the federal government taking some stuff off their plate, is there any more talk about expanding federal border wall segments or constructing new ones?
Yeah, at the same time, very recently, Homeland Security Secretary Noem announced that she's waiving more environmental regulations in order to build 17 more miles of border wall here in the Rio Grande Valley. This is the 5th waiver that she has issued under this new administration. That's going to expedite border wall construction. Also, they're going to build 27 miles near Tucson. They issued a $309 million contract to Fisher Sand and Gravel Company. You remember Tommy Fisher is the owner, CEO of that. He's actually the guy that built the private border wall here, the 3-mile segment here, that he self-funded kind of with We Build the Wall way back in 2019 and kind of launched him. He actually is the only one to get a border wall contract in excess of $1 billion to date, and that was out west a couple years ago.
Wow. Interesting stuff. We are here talking with Sandra Sanchez about border security, border wall, Texas's efforts to do so. And when we come back, we're actually going to talk about a different kind of threat? Crossing, a different kind of threat coming from the U.S.-Mexico border. So stay with us. We will be right back in less than a minute or so. You're watching Border Report Live. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host for the Tuesday edition from Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining me for today's edition is South Texas correspondent for Border Report, Sandra Sanchez. Hey, Sandra.
Hi, Rudy.
Hi. So, we're often talking about, earlier we were talking about Iranian nationals in the country illegally. We've talked about, individuals coming over, whether they're asylum seekers or whatever it may be. But that's not the only thing. And we kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago on our Border 101 episode. Tell us a little bit about this new problem, the New World Screwworm.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. Also a threat to our border, very much so. They're called the New World Screwworms, but they're not worms. They are parasitic flies. These flies were eradicated back in the 1960s after they did millions of dollars in damage to the Texas cattle industry when they crossed the border. And the way they eradicated them was by sending sterilized male flies and basically ending the population, not allowing them to multiply. But we now have a new thriving population of these critters. What they do is the females lay their larvae in orifices, infected areas. In fact, they're kind of drawn to bad odors and decaying, and that's where they lay their nests. And then the larvae have these screw-looking teeth, and then they burrow and eat, and that's how they cause infection. I spoke to some people who were around the first time. They were telling me that they used to have to scrape out the wounds and put tar in them, and every day go look for newly infected horses or cattle or bison or other or deer, and they would spend a lot of money and time and get hurt in the process trying to treat these animals. It really could devastate the industry. So just for recently, U.S. Agriculture Commissioner Brooke Rollins actually came to the Rio Grande Valley. She came to Moore Air Base. This used to be a former Air Force base. It's just an air base now. You see that plane? Mm-hmm. They are planning putting millions of sterilized flies into that plane and other planes like it and flying it over southern parts of Mexico where currently the New World screwworms are thriving. Had a little science kits out there for us to kind of see. She entertained many ranchers and agriculture specialists. One thing about these parasitic flies is that the females are monogamous, the males are not. So you sterilize the males and you pretty much can end the population. And already, because of this threat, they're right now about 900 miles south of us, south of McAllen, in the Strait of Tehuantepec. I knew I wasn't going to say that right. It's the thinnest part of Mexico. Look on a map and you'll see it. They're pretty much south of that area, and they're contained to that area, and they don't want it to go north. And in order to do that, they need to fly these flies over and drop them. Right now, they have about 110 million per week that they're dropping. Oh, wow. They want to make it 500 million. That's how bad the situation is. It's kind of crazy. So, yeah.
Is there any timeline on, like, if they can't contain this, when that could start, affecting us or getting closer to us?
When they'll start, flying. Well, they're saying because they have wings that they just, heading on a northward trek, and they just don't want it to come any closer. So, what's really interesting about this is back in the pandemic is actually kind of when the flies got out of control, because we have a facility in Panama that the United States operates where they make these sterilized flies and they also disperse them. However, during the pandemic, the inspectors couldn't really get out and do their jobs as they needed to, and the flies began to multiply and get out of control. Pretty soon, we're seeing them in Costa Rica and Panama. Interesting, like you mentioned, Secretary Nome is in Panama today, and she's also planning to visit Costa Rica. I'm sure this will be a topic that they talk about. So when she came recently, she announced this $8 million to get this dispersal facility up, to get these planes up, to get these additional flies dropped and to try to stop it. They're also going to put traps along the Rio Grande, send inspectors constantly monitoring to make sure that there are no infected flies that are located here. A couple weeks ago, she also did close the ports of entry to live cows, livestock coming from Mexico, and that is hurting the industry. But she says if we can get these planes up in the air and the fly population down, she may loosen that and open one or two in the next few weeks.
And that was going to kind of be my next question is we have all of these animals that we're bringing over, livestock, as you said, and fruits and vegetables, not saying that they can get in fruits and vegetables, but how do, as a CBP officer, how are you looking for a fly? Are you looking for larvae? What kind of work do they go through?
I've seen some of these inspectors. It's amazing the jobs that they do. They go through a crate full of, say, cabbage, and they're looking for this tiny thing that's, the size of a pinhead, and they empty the stuff out. If anything moves, if there's debris, if there's waste from something, they really know what they're looking for. Now, we've been assured so far no New World screwworms have been detected on the border, that they're not here yet. They're still, like I said, about 900 miles away. But it's such a threat that's why they're trying to get way ahead of this. Now, ultimately, they want to build another sterilization facility here in Hidalgo County at Moore Air Base. But that's a long-term goal. That's going to take 2 to 3 years. There's a bill that's pending in Congress. Senator Cornyn, as well as Representative Tony Gonzalez from West Texas, Republicans have proposed. But that's going to take about $300 million, and that's going to take funding and approval from Congress and a couple years to get up and running. But they're saying they can get these flights up and off the ground and be killing these flies within 6 months with this $8 million.
Well, it's just so interesting, the economic impact. You know, we were just talking about livestock, how this could hurt our livestock, our cattle, our animals here on this side of the border if it were to spread, but just such a big amount of money already being spent, and it hasn't even gotten to a point where it's affecting us directly yet.
Right. Well, and what we're hearing is, you know, it's because they're saying Tony Gonzalez got up there and said, we're not going to get screwed by the screw worm. We're not going to not have steaks on our table. You know, there is already a drop in cattle in the U.S. market and in the Texas market because we're not getting it from Mexico. And that's going to drive up prices, and that's going to affect people's dinner tables very soon. And so it is very important that, you know, they get these flies under control. Such a tiny being is really a big threat.
It almost kind of goes hand in hand with the water. Cattle ranchers up here, we're kind of getting it twofold. If you think about it, the lack of water, not a whole bunch of hay, that's hurting cattle prices as well. It just seems that a lot of things that are happening on the border are, like you said, affecting the food we're putting on our table on a daily basis.
It's not an easy place to make a living, right?
Not at all. Well, thank you so much, Sandra, for joining us today. We really appreciate you having on. If you're interested in Sandra's reporting or any of the very seasoned border journalists that we have from here all the way to San Diego, you can visit borderreport.com for more. You can also catch this episode and all our previous episodes there as well. Thank you all so much for joining us for this Tuesday South Texas edition from Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. For Sandra Sanchez, my name is Rudy Mireles. I've been your host. We'll talk to you next time.